Welcome to Stop and Scare. I'm so glad you found me. I hope you stay a while and let me scare the hell out of you. Subscribe if you're new to my channel, and be sure to like the video to help it grow and reach a wider audience. If you would like your story featured on an upcoming video, email the email in the description box below at the end. I hope you enjoy. Stop by, and I hope you get your scare. Story number 1. I'm a 19-year-old female that depends solely on public transportation to get everywhere I go. I used to be addicted to hard drugs, so I lost my license and legal right to drive. Anyways, enough about my personal situation. I work retail at a large shopping center and start my shift at 6 a.m. stocking inventory. The time of the year was late fall, and the temperature in the mornings was very cold. Snow was in the forecast, so I bundled up and boarded the dimly lit C-Tran bus, started my journey to the mall. I always make sure to assess my surroundings constantly, no matter what I'm doing or where I am. Being female already makes me an elevated target. The driver was throwing off very spooky and extremely creepy vibes as soon as I said hello. I notice that there are only 3 passengers on board when I make my way to find my seat. Well, only 3 passengers that I could see. The 3 bus riders all looked very strange and out of sorts. I always like to sit near the middle to the front section of the bus, so I remain within the driver's field of vision. I don't want to take any unnecessary risks if I can avoid it. I find a seat and try and settle in. I set my backpack down on the seat next to me, started putting my AirPods in for the hour-and-a-half trip. I sit there in solitude for what feels like 30 or 40 minutes, and then notice something slowly roll from behind my seat and directly into view. It's what appears to be a small child's toy, like a small bouncy ball or super ball. Before I can maneuver my head around to look behind my seat, another bouncy ball rolls into view between my seats, and then another, and then another. What the fuck is happening? I think to myself in that moment. I gather the nerve and eventually turn around, and I see nothing, not a damn thing. I slowly continue to scan the bus seats behind me. There is no one seated behind me, at least, or I thought there wasn't, when I got on the bus. I crouch down to look under the seats behind me, and I freeze as my blood runs ice cold. I see what appears to be a shoelace slowly dangling down from a seat near the back of the bus. So, maybe it's just a creepy kid or group of kids trying to mess with me or prank me. I didn't want to overreact or worry needlessly, but my gut told me in that moment that there was more happening. I took out my AirPods and decided against music for the rest of my journey to work. 5 minutes of peace and quiet. Then I have this spine-tingling sensation and a feeling to look behind me. I feel this unknown presence, and I turn around fast and abruptly. There was an elderly man sitting less than 10 inches from my face. He has this absolutely terrifying grin on his face that reminds me of the Joker from Batman. He smells so rancid, and like BO, I threw up in my mouth and had to swallow it down. I quickly got up from my seat, and before I had my backpack over my shoulder, I felt this ice-cold and leathery hand grab my arm. This man was so elderly that I was shocked about how strong he truly was. I tried pulling away, but he pulled me in closer to him with such force that I almost lost my balance. He whispered,
"It's okay, Cassie. I would never hurt you."
He then let go, and I gathered my wits and yelled at the bus driver to stop. Please let me off. Nothing happened after that. I made my way off the bus, and as I was walking away, the man smiled and winked this sinister wink. I feel like that situation was something right out of the Twilight Zone. What do you guys think? Story number 2. I was riding a not very crowded bus in LA when a very old woman gets on the bus, maybe in her 80s. She's wearing a tight sequin dress, has crazy white hair, and is carrying some groceries. And she has an eye socket that has been completely gouged out. There is still dried blood, and as she stands next to me, mind you, there were open seats, she keeps picking at her eye and wiping her hand on the grocery bags that were banging into me. The woman, she seemed perfectly fine. Just a lady with a completely gouged out eyeball on the bus. Not a care in the world. Story number 3. I was taking the last bus home from a friend's house at about 1 a.m. The bus is completely empty except for me and the bus driver until we get to a stop about 15 minutes from my house. A man gets on holding an animal carrying cage, sits directly next to me, and pulls out a large fuzzy rabbit out of the cage. He then sticks the rabbit down the front of his sweatpants and smiles creepily at me until I get off the bus. Story number 4. I was waiting for a bus in London at around 11 p.m. at night. I was alone at the bus stop until a man in a hoodie and sporting a backpack walked up to the stop. He stood at the opposite end of the bus and looked over at me in sort of a creepy way. Not wanting to assume he was crazy, but still being wary from past experiences of nearly being raped, I casually pulled out my pepper spray and loaded it. He took off his backpack, pulled on a pair of gloves and a rope from it, put the gloves and backpack on, and then began wrapping the rope around his left hand. I got so scared, so I stepped off the pavement to run across the street. Luckily, my bus came at that moment, so I ran like a crazy woman onto it and sat down. While the bus was pulling away, I looked out the window at the scary man, and he was staring at me intensely, with the rope wrapped around his left hand and his right hand holding it taut. I called my boyfriend after the experience, and he just laughed, said I was lying. I'm fairly sure I escaped the clutches of some sort of strangler in Lewisham. Story number 5. I got on a mostly empty bus and sat down. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone get up, cross the aisle, and sit down in the seat directly behind me. I thought that was weird, but I eventually put it out of my mind. The bus starts moving. A few minutes later, I feel something brush my side. I look down. The guy who had moved to sit behind me had reached around my seat to touch me. I turned around and gave the what the fuck look. He sat back and muttered a quick apology. I shrugged it off as something odd, resumed staring out the window. A few minutes later, it happens again. I turn around and say loudly, "Keep your hands to yourself." Then I get up and move to a seat in the frontmost row. The bus stops to take on more passengers. Someone sits next to me. I do not look up to see who it is. Then I feel a hand on my knee. I look over, and it's the man. So I shout, "Keep your fucking hands to yourself." He mutters, "I ain't doing anything. It was an accident." A woman nearby has seen and heard the entire situation. She gets up and starts yelling at the guy. He starts yelling back. The bus driver notices and informs the man that he will be getting off at the next stop. The man is still shouting at the woman. She lets him know that she'll be getting off to kick his ass. The driver makes him get off at the next stop, and the woman follows. I like to think she would beat his ass. She looked like she could have. Story number 6. I was waiting for the bus late at night when a guy with a trench coat approached me and whispered, "Psst, hey, you want to buy some meat?" I immediately thought he was going to flash me, but before I could react, he opened his trench coat to reveal meat, actual meat in styrofoam packages in his trench coat pockets. Ground meat, chicken, all kinds of meat. I didn't even know what to say. I mumbled something about being a vegetarian and ran to a nearby convenience store. I actually think it may have been less creepy if this fool would have just flashed me. Story number 8. I couldn't get into a general chemistry class at my university, so I was taking it at a local community college after my courses. The days we had lab, the class ended at 11:45 p.m., which was always the exciting time to ride the train on the way home. One night, I got on the train, stood in the middle section standing area, as to not disturb the characters on the train. A man gets on at the next stop and stands across from me. I was reading a book and ignored him, although I noticed he kept eyeing me. As I looked up to check the next stop, he says, "You could fit in my trunk." I immediately got off the train with the next large group and called my boyfriend to pick me up. Once upon a time, I was living in Sydney, Australia, taking the train, and a lovely gentleman who sounded like he was from Eastern Europe started up a conversation with me and the person I was with. About halfway through the conversation, I completely stopped talking and started staring right above his head at what looked like several dried streaks of blood and a dried, bloody handprint that had been thick enough at one point to drip down the wall. The man was leaning against the bottom portion of a couple of the streaks, as they were right above his seat. The benches sat flush to the walls of the car. The man didn't notice the blood at all, and was a bit confused at my silence. I think he thought I was being rude, or that I couldn't understand his accent, but either way, I had gone silent and wasn't paying attention, and so the guy I was with took over the conversation for me. When the man got off at the next stop, my buddy asked what happened, and I showed him the streaks and handprint. Upon closer examination, we determined that it was precisely what it was: blood all over the walls of the train car, and this poor guy had just rubbed the back of his head all over it, and I was way too shocked to say anything at the time. I feel bad. I wish I had the courage to tell him at that time. Story number 9. My boyfriend and I were on the bus in the countryside of Hungary, going to the town where my grandfather is from. In the last city before ours, a very drunk, not too well-off man comes on, carrying a large shopping bag. As he sits down in the very last seat, we see that the shopping bag contains an old chainsaw, with no cover around the chain or anything. He then continues to get out his phone and having a drunken shouting match in Hungarian to someone on the other end. We could just picture him taking out that chainsaw on the bus and going crazy. The scariest 20 minutes ever. Thank you guys for watching and listening to the very end of the video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you are new to the channel and you haven't subscribed yet, please be sure to subscribe now for future content. I'm uploading at least 2 to 3 videos every week to build the channel and to help build the following. That way we have that many more people listening and sending in stories. If you want your story featured, email the email in the description box below. I hope you guys all had a nice, safe, scary time with me.